as I said earlier, 95% of 4 to 6 year olds statistically are located within that blue circle. We are reducing that percentage even further by going out significantly further than the 5 kilometres, such as the effort that we've made to locate Gus.
Now, as you're about to hear, what has been astonishing in this particular case is how AI has been used possibly for the first time to possibly help crack a case. Listen to this.
What we did with the imagery that was captured by the aircraft and the drone, we gave to an external AI company who was able to provide us really high definition pictures and footage, and all of this imagery has been reviewed by members who are attached to Task Force Horizon.
Now, when you're dealing with a search like this, there are so many aspects to exclude. This is a sheep farm, and so you've got to go through huge amounts of terrain, and this is very difficult for human beings to review, but a computer and AI is able to identify this systematically and thoroughly and more effectively than people. And so have a look at the results of that AI. Look at the number of wedge-tailed eagles identified, the number of sheep, etc.
So I'd just like to give you just a bit of an indication of what that looks like. So when we get our report back from the company, you'll see on the right is essentially a circle. That is the circle out to 15 kilometres. And you'll see different colours within that. And what those colours are relates to what's on the left of the screen in terms of livestock and animals. So
there you have it: sheep around about 10,000, goats over 6,000, kangaroos almost 6,000, including western grey kangaroos. It can actually differentiate between those types. Sheep carcasses, there you see it, wedge-tailed eagles, 19 of them. Detections of interest, 13. Goats carcasses, 2, and then 1 human was seen as well. Total detections, 23,000. But where does this all take us? Well, that is the $63 million question.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
A further comprehensive forensic search was conducted of the Oak Park Station homestead, and a number of items were seized, including a vehicle, a motorcycle, and some electronic devices.
A vehicle, a motorcycle, and electronic devices, likely cell phones from inside the family home, were seized and have become subject to forensic investigation.
The person who has withdrawn their cooperation is now considered a suspect in the disappearance of Gus. I do want to stress, however, that Gus's parents are not suspects in his disappearance.
Now, that is a little cryptic for the uninitiated, but what it means is that Josh and Jess aren't suspects. I wonder if that means his grandparents, both of them, are, but perhaps one more than the other. According to The Guardian, someone who lived with 4-year-old Gus Lamont is now considered a suspect in his disappearance, South Australia Police said on Thursday, as they declared the case a major crime.
So you'll see in the shaded area is Oak Park Station itself. That is the boundary of the station. The 5.47 kilometres takes in a significant portion of the station, but you'll also see that it also just cuts out of the station into some of the neighbouring properties.
Now, that neighbouring property comment is something we're going to touch on in a moment. What are the neighbouring properties? So how about that? It's taken more than 4 months to decide that this was a crime after weeks and weeks of denials, weeks and weeks of, we've got just cooperation from the family. They are not suspects in this case, etc. I do think in the lull, when there's been no media coverage, that's gone on for about a month, even more. Perhaps it felt like the circus had left town to the people that were involved in this. And perhaps they became relaxed, And the cops, I think, in that time have been thinking critically about this case and also trying to keep the media at arm's length successfully. We know the search warrant for the home was kept very private in mid-January, when that really was the biggest breakthrough and led to the biggest breakthrough. According to The Guardian, Detective Superintendent Darren Filk, the officer in charge of major crime, said that police had effectively ruled out Gus wandering off and Gus being abducted. That second one is really important. He said that they were now investigating someone in his household, but stressed the subject was not one of his parents. Now, this is quite important, that Gus wasn't abducted either. That means something happened to Gus on the property, and I guess that has been covered up. I think it's fairly clear we are dealing with a family member. I don't think we are dealing with a worker or housekeeper or some member of staff. Otherwise, I think the cops would stress that his grandparents weren't suspects either, and you'll notice that they haven't said that. Now listen to this. Police had identified a number of inconsistencies and discrepancies in the information from the family members. Now, I don't think that is from his parents. I think it's from the other family members. And note the plural, right? Note the plural. And so I think we might be talking about grandparents. Remember way back when I said the snake on the porch incident was a distortion of what really happened, when it was said that he was firstly not brandishing a firearm when he was, and then also this whole thing of that this was done to shoot a snake, when clearly that was not the case either. Now, that showed me just how sly and easy it was for some people to cover their tracks with narrative, and the fact that no family member was ever permitted to talk to the press when ostensibly the family were distraught in an ongoing missing persons case that went on day after day, week after week, month after month. You're not actually going to even talk to the media, try and recruit their help. That was always not only a massive red flag, but massive hypocrisy, because instead they had some other dude make a tearful appeal on their behalf. Do you remember that? Now, according to The Guardian, as a result of these inconsistencies in terms of the statements made and investigations into these inconsistencies, a person who resides at Oak Park Station has withdrawn their support for the police and is no longer cooperating with us. So one person there has now said, I'm not going to cooperate. And so someone who was cooperating, who was related to an investigation, isn't now. Any guesses as to who that could be? By the way, the authorities seem to have come to this point by way of exclusion.
Looks like. So when we get our report back from the company, you'll see on the right is essentially a circle. That is the circle out to 15 kilometres. And you'll see different colours within that. And what those colours are relates to what's on the left of the screen.
I'm not going to take you through all of that, but they have, through this period of months, excluded all these possibilities: falling down a mine shaft, basically drowning in the dam, just wandering off as well. And what are you left with at the end of that? And so some inconsistencies and some problems with the statements, these are now raised above that level of reasonableness, right? They've searched and investigated all the alternatives until a single rational explanation remains: human mischief. And we often say, who is statistically the most likely to harm or abduct a small child? Well, a family member. The person who has withdrawn their cooperation is now considered a suspect in the disappearance of Gus. I do want to stress that Gus's parents are not suspects in his disappearance. You appreciate at this time I cannot make any further comment about the suspect, given that this is now a criminal investigation and declared a major crime. What I can say, however, is that we'll continue to thoroughly and meticulously investigate the disappearance of Gus until we get an outcome. Now, it remains to be seen what the forensic analysis of those cell phones have found, and also where vehicle telematics, whether that can reveal anything. What exactly were the movements of family members for those 3 hours when Gus supposedly went missing? Now, according to the South Australia Police website, the detective in charge notes, I anticipate there will be further searches at Oak Park Station and at several sites on an adjacent national park to locate Gus as new information and intelligence comes to hand as the investigation continues. And that was something that we suggested quite early on, is that they need to search the homestead. And so the question is, where is Gus? Is he at the homestead or perhaps at a adjacent national park? That would be sort of a neutral area where if Gus was eventually found years later, it would seemingly exonerate family members. Well, perhaps not so much now. Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. But this is a breaking news story, so we will be closely monitoring further developments in this particular case. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.